Greetings and welcome back. This is not a standard video, but the other day I received a query from none other than the most esteemed High Lord Gopher, Mancunian and honorary Northman. And a man of Gopher standing deserves a response forthwith. Now, before I go into how do you pronounce the word shaman properly, if that's any indication of how I'm pronouncing it, this is not as straightforward as the case was with the word lich. Let me explain why and a couple of other details. Now, with the word lich, we have a native English word, a native Germanic word that's shared across virtually all Germanic languages, and so we can build a picture based on the native phonology, that is the sound system of English, the native phonology of English, as well as the phonology of other Germanic languages, as well as the changes that have taken place over, roughly speaking, 1,000 years of written documented history of what happened to lich or what didn't. So we can really arrive at I would say a 95% plus degree of certainty as to how it's pronounced. Now, with words that are borrowed into a language that are not native to the language, of which English has many, multitudes, they are legion in English, it's not quite as clear. And before I proceed to the actual word shaman, let me give you a little background on what I mean here. Because with non-native words, and with native words sometimes, you're going to get what we call free variants, different kinds of pronunciation. Simply put, take the word garage in English, in the English language, garage, and I pronounce it as a native American speaker, garage. That is to say, the stress is on the second syllable, garage, just like it would be in French, although it's not a perfect replication of the French, would be garage. Because in French, the stress, if you want to call it that, always lands on the second syllable, or the last syllable, essentially, the ultimate syllable, as we say. But in British English, you would say garage. And I've never heard Gopher say garage, if you're watching this Gopher, I assume that's how you would say it. You would say garage. You would put stress on the first syllable. And why? Pretty simple. English, being a Germanic language, has a first syllable stress pattern. Native words are almost always going to have stress on the first syllable, unless it's a certain compounds. There are some rare exceptions. And so that was assimilated into British English in a different way. Now, trying to remember off the top of my head now, the word garage first appeared in the English language, written at least, somewhere around between 1902 and 1906, the very, very beginning of the 20th century. Used to mean sort of a shelter or a holding spot for a vehicle. And now I'm going to speculate why it took two different avenues as far as the pronunciation is concerned. Well, and this is pure speculation. Ultimately, it's a bit arbitrary. Why did the British convert garage to a syllable first stress pattern in English, and why did the Americans retain, at least partially, on the pronunciation of the stress on the final syllable? Well, who ultimately knows? Speculation. However, the British Empire, the colonial power, was still more or less at its zenith during the very beginning of the 20th century. It makes sense from a nationalistic point of view that a word entering that language would then be assimilated to native patterns, whereas the United States, at that point in time, was not yet an international power, at least on the spectrum, on the level of Great Britain. Pure speculation on my part. I don't know. We don't know. Which is what I'm trying to say is that with borrowed words, there's just no way of knowing. In the very old cases, take a word like courage, was borrowed hundreds of years ago out of Old French, specifically out of Old Norman French. In that case, both American English and British English reconverted the pronunciation, the phonology, to conform to English pattern stress on the first syllable. And we can explain that. But with later variants, with variants that come in later, it's very difficult. It's just not as clear cut. And before I proceed to the word shaman, There are plenty of native words. I mean, we all have a different accent. Even the United States or the penal colony, i.e., Australia, the penal colony having even less variety than the United States, being far younger. And Australia is almost uniformly known for its uniformity of pronunciation, with some variants. There are some variants, but they're not very strong. Even we have a lot of variation within the United States. I speak a general American, but I originally come from the Northeast. I don't speak a Midwestern general American, for example. I think in the Midwest, you'll have what we call a homophone. You'll sort of the word cot, as in something to sleep on, versus cot. Those are two different vowels for me. They are cot and cot in the Midwest, usually. But there are two different vowels for me. That's one example. Just as if you listen to Gopher, originally hailing from the fine city of Manchester, as he does, well, he wouldn't be saying does. He would be saying something along the lines of, and I apologize, this is not a perfect replication, dus, just, much, dus, just, much. I'm not, I mean, it's totally out of context, but, dun, I'm dun. I can't do the Mancunian accent. I'm just giving an approximation. In Yorkshire, it would be similar. That is with that vowel. So standard English would be and as in done, even in standard British English, and then you would have an U sound, dun, jus, and so on and so forth, dus. And this is a consistent pattern, which has to do with historical developments, which I'm not going to get into here. That would take way too long. The point I'm trying to make, though, Sir Gopher, and to anyone else who might be watching this, is that it doesn't really matter. I mean, how you pronounce things, you can look at the etymology, you can look back at things, you can get an idea of what's going on, but at the end of the day, people are going to pronounce things as they pronounce them. People don't use etymology as a guide, and people pronounce the things as they're accustomed to. Where I come from, originally in New York City, in some of the less educated classes, and I think these days it's almost entirely gone, more or less. You have what we call non-rhoticism, which is typical, I'll explain what that is, in British English. It's the fact that you don't never hear this R sound. Say R, right? So in New Yorker varieties, they say you are, as opposed to you are. These are just varieties that tend to deviate from the standard, but so with foreign words like garage, like shaman. I mean, shaman is a word that was borrowed based on my understanding, and I actually researched this word years ago because I was interested in fairly recently. So having said that, talked about free variants and so on and so forth, let's just briefly talk about the word shaman. Shaman is not an English word, it's not a Germanic word, it's not even an Indo-European word. It most likely comes from the Tungus peoples of eastern Siberia, the Tungusic group of languages. These are a group of languages that are distantly related possibly to Turkish, and I'm not going to get into why, but anyway, way past the Ural Mountains, which you can see here, eastern Siberia, harsh, inhospitable place, probably by way of Russian, and then by way of German, and then by way of German into English. Now, there's another theory that says before it even entered that word, it came from Chinese, which would be, my Chinese pronunciation is terrible, Shaman, which is sort of a Buddhist monk, but didn't come into Chinese directly from Chinese, but rather through Chinese by way of Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the holy language of Buddhism, and in India, different topic. Won't get into that. Which was like a monk ascetic, this word in Sanskrit. So, I mean, give or take, we're talking about 4 or 6 different channels that it had to go through until it got into English. So, the question is, how do you pronounce it? I'd say shaman is the most accurate pronunciation, but that, like I said, it doesn't really matter, and it is largely speculative. Why? Because it was borrowed into Russian, being pronounced as my Russian is shaman, and then in German shamana, and then in English shaman. Now, you will hear free variants, particularly in American English, to hear shaman. That's what happens when foreign words are borrowed into a native language. They're assimilated into the native phonology of the language, that is adapted to it. Whereas what we call English does not have continental values. Continental values are the orderly things like in Spanish or in Portuguese. An a is an a, and an e is an e, and an a is an a. Well, that's all topsy-turvy in English. So you'll have shaman. But it doesn't really matter. Would it probably be more accurate to say shaman? Probably, because all the channels that the word has gone through have more or less had this sort of shaman pronunciation. So that's probably the most likely the way it's pronounced properly. But whatever proper means, there is no such thing at the end of the day between proper and improper pronunciation. It's a matter of perception. Am I not pronouncing things properly because I say does as opposed to does, and Gopher says does as opposed to does, and so on and so forth? And this goes for grammar as well. Final note. I mean, the beginning of Gopher's most recent Let's Play, he talks to Kajo, and he says, "Why are you stood there?" That's a very common colloquial British expression, having lived in the UK for a number of years. Despite that, I would never use it. I would say, "Why is Kajo standing there?" Is it wrong? No, it's just different. Anyway, I hope that clears it up. This etymology is not perfectly known, but based on the various channels it's gone through, it's most likely that as a shaman is the more accurate pronunciation. Anyway, thanks for watching, and time to get on to other things, and hopefully Gopher that answers your query. And I appreciate you sending me the PM. May the gods watch over you, and may the land of oil be kind to you.